Those were the first words my daughter-in-law threw across the table at my grandson's graduation dinner. I didn't flinch. I'd been expecting this. I simply lifted a hand to our waiter, and the big screen behind the bar flickered to life. Stay with me until the end, and drop the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. I've been married twice, buried one husband, and raised 3 children. At 67, I thought I'd witnessed every shade of human cruelty. I was wrong. The Riverside Country Club glowed with soft light and quiet celebration. Crystal glasses chimed, conversations hummed. My grandson Elliot, Harvard Law School full scholarship, sat at the head of the table in a sharp navy suit, confidence radiating. "Grandma Thelma, did you see Professor Morrison's face when I spoke?" He whispered, eyes shining. "You've always had a gift with words," I said, squeezing his hand. "Your grandfather would be proud." Then the air chilled. "Oh, please," a voice cut through the room like a knife. Esme, my daughter-in-law, stood, her designer dress catching the chandelier light. Her smile was the kind she wore only when she wanted to wound. "This woman," she said, pointing straight at me, "has been playing the sweet grandmother for years. But she's nothing but a disgrace." Gas rippled through the dining room. My son David tried to intervene. "Esme, that's enough." But she stepped closer, voice rising so the entire room could hear. "She dresses like she shops at thrift stores. She says all the wrong things. Every time we're in public, I have to pretend she isn't a complete embarrassment. 15 years of excuses, 15 years of damage control. You make me sick." The words landed like blows, but a strange calm settled over me. Instead of shame, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I smiled. Just a small curve of the lips that puzzled her more than any tears could. Slowly, I reached into my purse, tapped my phone, and caught the waiter's eye. The soft jazz faded. A video began to play. The flat screen on the far wall, normally reserved for the club's event calendar, suddenly flickered to life with a very different scene. Esme turned and the color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. But there she was, crystal clear in high definition, sitting in a lawyer's office. A timestamp marked the footage as 6 months old. "So you want to sever all ties?" the attorney's voice asked. "Completely," Esme answered on the recording. "I don't want her to have any legal claim to contact or visitation. As far as I'm concerned, I never had a daughter." The blood left her cheeks so fast I thought she might faint. She staggered, gripping the table for balance. "What is this?" David's voice cracked. The video rolled on. "You understand this means she'll have no support system at all?" the lawyer pressed. "Good," Esme's recorded voice replied, cold and steady. "Maybe that will finally teach her that actions have consequences." Esme's knees buckled. She collapsed into her chair, then folded forward onto the table, unconscious. Gas rippled through the dining room, but I stayed perfectly still, eyes on the screen, watching my daughter-in-law's carefully guarded secret unravel for the entire country club crowd to see. I'd been waiting exactly 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days for this. It began with a knock at my door. I was arranging flowers when the bell rang. At my age, surprise visitors usually mean a salesman, or a neighbor with gossip I don't need. But the man on my porch wasn't selling anything. Raymond Torres, mid-50s, gray suit that had seen better days, a weathered leather briefcase. His handshake was firm yet kind, the eyes of someone who's seen too much of humanity's shadows. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, voice steady and professional. "I believe you're expecting me. 3 weeks earlier, after a stray comment from my neighbor Dorothy, I'd hired him." Dorothy had mentioned spotting Esme entering a downtown law office. Her cousin worked the front desk there and had whispered, "Family law." Raymond followed me into the kitchen, the same table where I'd nervously dialed his number. "I have to tell you," he began, opening the briefcase. "What I found goes beyond what you asked for." My stomach tightened. I'd only wanted to know why Esme was meeting a lawyer. "Before I show you," he continued, sliding out a thick manila folder, "understand this. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss." I met his gaze. "Mr. Torres, I've been married twice, buried a husband, and raised 3 children mostly alone. The truth, no matter how ugly, is always better than a beautiful lie." He nodded and opened the folder. The first document made my vision blur. Petition for termination of parental rights. Voluntary surrender. "She has another daughter," Raymond said quietly. "Madison Phillips. She's 23 now." My hands trembled. Esme had walked away from a child, not out of desperation or hardship. The petition stated plainly she wanted a fresh start with a new family unit. Raymond slid the next paper forward, a social worker's report, and that was only the beginning. Madison was only 15 when Esme walked out of her life, left in the care of an aging grandmother who passed away 2 years later. By 17, Madison had aged out of foster care with no family, no college fund, no safety net. Where is she now? My voice was barely a whisper. Working 2 jobs in downtown Portland, Raymond said quietly. Finishing community college on her own. He handed me a photo. My breath caught. Madison had Elliot's warm brown eyes, the same shade from my son David's side of the family, and Esme's delicate bone structure. But the expression was all her own. A quiet strength, a weariness that only comes from learning too young how cold the world can be. She doesn't know about your family, Raymond continued. As far as Madison is concerned, her mother vanished and never looked back. She has no idea Esme remarried and built a brand new life. The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table. How did you find this? Public records, he replied. Court documents, mostly. And I spoke with people who knew them before Esme left. There's something else you should hear. I braced myself. Madison had started asking about her father, Raymond said. She wanted answers about her mother's past. Neighbors say Esme began seeing her own daughter as a liability, someone who might interfere with her plans to start fresh. The words struck like blows. I thought of Elliot, how proudly Esme paraded him in public. Was that love real, or just another performance? Here's video, Raymond added. Video? I obtained security footage from the law office. Your daughter-in-law is very clear about her intentions. He slid a small USB drive across the table. That night, alone in my living room, I closed the curtains and pressed play. There sat Esme, perfectly composed, speaking about her own child as if she were crossing off a to-do list. She wasn't just ending contact. She'd studied the legal process to make sure Madison could never reach her, erasing her past as casually as deleting old files. I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Madison, juggling night shifts as a security guard and weekend hours as a barista just to afford classes, surviving on grit alone. And I thought of Elliot, the grandson Esme showcased like a prize. What would happen if one day he no longer fit her image? Most of all, I thought of my son David, still believing he'd married a loving partner. I knew I had to act. But how do you tell your child that the woman he loves once abandoned her own daughter? How do you make sure she never does it again? I asked Raymond to find Madison and learn everything about her present life. He reported back. She was struggling but determined, living in a tiny studio and pushing through school with sheer willpower. Meanwhile, I had him keep watching Esme. I needed to know if there were more secrets. What he uncovered chilled me. Esme had done this in other ways before, cutting off former friends, distant relatives, even her own mother whenever they no longer fit the image she wanted the world to see. This wasn't simple selfishness. It was calculated. My daughter-in-law wasn't just difficult, she was a master manipulator. My family was her latest stage. For weeks I agonized. Should I tell David, reach out to Madison, confront Esme myself? Then I remembered something my first husband always said. The best way to catch a liar is to let them keep talking. I waited. I watched. I documented everything, and I planned for the day Esme would finally reveal herself to everyone who mattered. That day arrived sooner than I'd imagined. The video kept rolling while Esme lay slumped across the white tablecloth, as if she'd simply decided to nap in the middle of her own undoing. The staff hurried to clear nearby tables, but half the country club had already witnessed the secret she'd guarded for years. On screen, her voice remained cold and precise. I don't want her to be able to find me. As far as the world is concerned, Madison Phillips is not my daughter. David sat frozen, his face shifting from confusion to shock to a quiet horror. Dad? Elliot's voice cracked. Who is Madison Phillips? Before David could answer, Esme's eyes fluttered open. She lifted her head, mascara streaked beneath her eyes, blinking at the room as though she'd awakened in a nightmare. Then she saw the screen. Reality hit like a blow. Turn it off, she whispered, louder now, frantic. Turn it off. She staggered to her feet and lurched toward the controls. But Marcus, the waiter, stepped neatly in her path. I gave him the slightest shake of my head. Esme turned back to our table. Her perfect hair was a tangle now, her designer dress rumpled. This is out of context, she insisted. You don't understand. Then explain it, I said evenly. My voice carried the calm of someone who'd rehearsed this moment for months. Who is Madison Phillips, Esme? Silence spread like smoke. Conversations around us stopped mid-sentence. The entire room seemed to lean in. Esme's voice cracked. She looked to David, searching for an ally. She's my daughter. From before I met you. Your daughter. David's tone was flat. You have a daughter? Had, Esme corrected quickly. It was a long time ago. It was complicated. You don't know what my life was like then. The lawyer's voice on the video interrupted, merciless. And you're certain you want to include the clause preventing any future contact? This is quite permanent, Miss Phillips. Completely certain, Esme's recorded voice answered. I want a clean slate. No complications from my past. Elliot shoved his chair back. How old was she when you did this? Esme's eyes darted between her husband and her son. She was 15, but you have to understand. 15? David's voice cracked like a whip. You abandoned a 15-year-old? I didn't abandon her. Esme shot back, her pitch rising. She had her grandmother, a support system. I couldn't handle being a mother then. I watched with the calm detachment of someone observing an experiment she'd set in motion. But you could handle being a mother to me? Elliot's voice was quiet but sharp. What made me different? Esme blinked, caught off guard. That's different. You're different. How? You just are. Her voice was climbing, frantic. I was young when I had Madison. I wasn't ready. But when I met your father, when we had you, I was in a completely different place. I decided it was time. Actually, Esme, according to the court documents, you were 28 when you signed away your rights to Madison. Hardly a child yourself. The room went silent. So silent I could hear the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. David finally looked at me. You knew? I found out 4 months ago, I said steadily. I hired a private investigator after I saw Esme leaving a law office. I wanted to know what she was hiding. You had me investigated? Esme's voice shot up an octave. You invaded my privacy. You had no right. I had every right, I answered, my tone like a blade. You married my son. You became part of my family, and something about you never felt right. The video neared its end. The lawyer's final question rang out across the dining room. And what should we do if Madison Phillips ever tries to contact you in the future? Esme's recorded reply came through the speakers, icy and unmistakable. Tell her I'm dead. The words on the video hit the dining room like a thunderclap. A collective gasp rippled through nearby tables. Even the servers froze, eyes fixed on our corner. Elliot's face turned ghost white. You wanted her to think you were dead? He whispered. It was kinder that way, Esme said, voice trembling but defiant. Don't you see? A clean break. She could grieve and heal instead of waiting for me to come back. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard, David said quietly. Selfish? Esme spun toward him, eyes wild. I was protecting her. I was protecting all of us. No, I said, my words calm and sharp. You were protecting yourself. You wanted a fresh start with David and Elliot. Madison was an inconvenience. That's not true. Then where is she now, Esme? I pulled up a photo on my phone and held it out. Where is the daughter you were supposedly protecting? The image showed Madison in a security guard uniform, crossing a dim parking lot at 3 a.m. Her shoulders slumped from exhaustion, her eyes focused and alone. Esme stared at the screen. For an instant, something almost human flickered across her face. Her voice faltered. She's working 2 jobs to put herself through community college, I said evenly. She lives in a studio apartment that eats 3/4 of her income. No family, no safety net. Because you decided she didn't fit your plans. The room went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. The screen behind us faded back to the country club's event calendar, as if nothing had happened. David stood slowly, every movement deliberate. I need to leave, he said. David, wait! Esme reached for him. He stepped back. Don't. He turned to our grandson. Son, are you coming with me? Elliot looked between them, hurt and confusion warring across his face. Finally he nodded and rose. This isn't over, Esme said, her voice sharpening as she watched her family walk away. You think you've won, Thelma? You think destroying my marriage makes you a hero? I lifted my purse and faced her one last time. I didn't destroy anything. I just made sure my son knows who he married. Dozens of eyes followed as we left the dining room. By morning, the story would echo through every circle that mattered to Esme. Her flawless image as the perfect wife and mother had shattered, but I knew this was only the beginning. Esme was not the kind to accept defeat. Exactly 48 hours later, the first counterstrike landed. I was in the garden, trimming roses when my phone rang. My youngest daughter's voice trembled through the line. "Mom, what's happening?" Esme called me this morning crying. She says you've been trying to ruin her marriage for months. The peace of the morning shattered. She told me you hired someone to spy on her, that you ambushed her at Elliot's graduation dinner, Sarah continued. She said you're trying to turn the family against her because you've never accepted her. I could almost hear the script Esme had used, casting herself as the victim, me as the villain. "Sarah," I said carefully, "there's more to this story than she told you." "Mom." "She says you violated her privacy. Did you really have her followed?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of a truth that shouldn't need defending. "Yes, I did, but not for the reasons she gave you." "Then why?" Sarah's voice softened, almost pleading. "How do you tell your own daughter that her sister-in-law is a predator in pearls? How do you explain that the woman who sat at our holiday table for 15 years abandoned her own child?" "She has another daughter, Sarah," I said finally. "A daughter she left when the girl was 15. Silence. "Her name is Madison," I continued. "She's 23 now. Working 2 jobs to put herself through community college with no family, no support, because Esme legally cut every time." Another long pause, then a quiet, stunned reply. "Are you sure?" "I have court documents, video recordings, everything," I said, but I could already hear doubt creeping into Sarah's voice. "Mom, that sounds extreme," she replied, "even for someone you don't like. Are you sure you're not misunderstanding?" And there it was, the seed Esme had planted. My own daughter was questioning my judgment, my motives, my reality. This was Esme's specialty. I'd learned that much from Raymond's investigation. She never just abandoned people. She dismantled them, piece by piece, until no one believed a word they said. By the time the truth surfaced, it looked like nothing more than a bitter lie. After I hung up, I sat in the garden watching the sun climb higher, thinking about warfare. Most people imagine battles are won with grand gestures. Esme knew better. The surest victory is when your enemy destroys themselves. By late afternoon, the phone calls started. 2 cousins, Elliot's girlfriend Jennifer. Each carried some version of the same story. Poor Esme, targeted by a jealous mother-in-law who can't accept her son's happiness. Dorothy, my closest neighbor and oldest friend, came for our usual tea. She set her cup of Earl Grey on the table and gave me a careful look. "I don't want to take sides, Thelma," she began, "but people are talking. And some of it doesn't make you look good." "What exactly are they saying?" "That you've been jealous from the start. That you resented how perfect David and Esme seemed. That you hired a private investigator to dig up dirt. And when you couldn't find anything serious, you twisted it to make her look bad." "Twisted?" My voice sharpened. "Dorothy, she abandoned her 15-year-old daughter. She legally erased her own child. How is that out of context?" Dorothy shifted uneasily. "I heard the girl was troubled, acting out, maybe into drugs. Esme was young and scared. She thought Madison would be better off with other family members." I stared at my friend, hearing Esme's lies spill effortlessly from her mouth. "Where did you hear that?" "Esme called me yesterday. She said she planned to tell David about Madison when the time was right, but you forced her hand." She swore the situation was more complicated than it looked. Of course Esme had called Dorothy. She was circling my entire support system, rewriting history one conversation at a time. "Did she mention that Madison has been completely alone since she was 17? That she aged out of foster care with no family at all?" Dorothy frowned. "She said Madison chose to cut ties. That the girl was angry about the custody arrangement and refused to stay in contact. Lies, wrapped in just enough detail to sound believable." Esme had flipped the script, turning herself into the wounded mother and me into the villain. That evening, David called. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of someone who'd been convinced he had to manage me. "Of course, sweetheart. Dinner here? Actually, but better if we meet somewhere neutral. The coffee shop on Elm Street. Tomorrow at 2. Neutral, as though I were a threat. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a quiet table in the back. David came in exactly on time, moving with the slow determination of someone about to deliver bad news. He sat without ordering, folding his hands as if bracing for impact. "Mom, I've been thinking since graduation night," he began. "What you did, hiring someone to investigate Esme, ambushing her in public, it wasn't right. No matter what you found, that wasn't the way to handle it." A cold heaviness settled in my chest. "And what would have been the right way?" I asked. "You should have come to me privately. We could have talked as a family, worked through whatever issues you have with my wife." "Issues I have?" I repeated carefully. "David, this isn't about me disliking Esme. This is about her abandoning her own child." He exhaled, eyes clouded. "According to Esme, it's more complicated than what you saw in that video. She says she was trying to do what was best for a troubled teenager, and that you deliberately took her words out of context to make her look as bad as possible." There it was, the rewritten history, delivered by my own son with the quiet certainty of someone desperate to believe it. "Did she also tell you," I asked, that Madison works 2 jobs just to survive? That she has no family, no safety net?" David's jaw tightened. "She told me Madison chose to cut contact, that she was angry about the custody arrangement and refused help. And you believe that?" "I believe my wife," he said firmly. "And frankly, Mom, the lengths you went to dig up her past make me question your motives." I stared at my son, Esme's influence written across his face like graffiti. She had taken his natural loyalty and turned it against me. "My motives?" I kept my voice calm, though inside I was screaming. "David, I was trying to protect this family." "From what? From a woman who made difficult choices as a young mother? From someone who wanted to start fresh? From someone who can abandon her own child when that child becomes inconvenient," I said. "You don't know what happened." "I know exactly what happened. I have the documentation." "Documentation you got by violating her privacy," David shot back, leaning forward. "Mom, you have to understand. Esme is my wife, the mother of my son. What you did was cruel and vindictive." His words landed like blows. My own child, the boy I'd raised and sacrificed for, was defending the woman who had erased her own daughter. "So what happens now?" I asked quietly. "Now we move forward," he said. "Esme's willing to consider family counseling, but she needs to feel safe from future attacks." "Attacks?" I almost laughed. "Esme is afraid of me?" "She's afraid of what else you might do," David said evenly. The absurdity of it nearly stole my breath. Esme, the woman who'd abandoned a teenager without a second thought, afraid of a 67-year-old grandmother who had simply told the truth. "And what about Madison?" I asked. "If what you say is true, maybe we can help her," David said, his tone softening. "But that's something Esme and I will decide together, as a family, as a family." The word stung. In that moment, I understood exactly where I stood, outside the circle. When David left the coffee shop, I realized Esme had won the first round. She hadn't just survived the revelation, she'd used it to isolate me from my own children, but she underestimated me. I'd fought battles longer than she'd been alive, and I wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, I was making dinner for one when the doorbell rang. My social calendar had thinned since graduation night. People were quietly choosing sides in a drama they barely understood. I opened the door and froze. A young woman stood on the porch, her eyes the same warm brown as David's, her bone structure delicate like Esme's. But something about her presence was wholly her own. Quiet strength mixed with cautious resolve. "Mrs. Caldwell?" she asked. "Oh, my name is Madison Phillips. I think we need to talk." My legs nearly gave way. After months of investigating her from a distance, seeing her in the flesh felt unreal, like a character stepping out of a book. "Madison," I breathed, gripping the doorframe for balance. "How did you find me? It wasn't easy." She shifted a worn backpack higher on her shoulder. "But when someone hires a private investigator to look into your life, word eventually gets back to you, especially in a city as small as Portland." "Of course." Raymond had been careful, but not invisible. In my rush to protect my family, I hadn't considered that Madison might discover the search. "I know this is strange," she continued, "but I drove down from Portland because I needed to understand why someone was asking questions about me and what I found out." Her voice caught. It changed everything I thought I knew about my life. I stepped aside quickly. "Please come in." Can I get you something to eat? You must be exhausted from the drive. Coffee would be great if you had it. As I poured coffee, Madison stood in my kitchen, taking in every detail. She was smaller than I'd imagined, barely 5'3", but there was a presence about her that filled the room. So, she said at last, "You're Esme's mother-in-law." "I am," I said quietly. "And you're her daughter." Apparently, the word landed bitterly. Though I spent the last 8 years believing she was dead, I nearly dropped the coffee pot. "What?" Madison sank into the same kitchen chair where, months earlier, Raymond had first shown me the documents exposing Esme's lies. "When I aged out of foster care, I tried to find her," Madison said. "I even hired a private investigator with the money from my first job. He came back with a death certificate. Said my mother died in a car accident 2 years earlier." The coffee maker gurgled in the heavy silence. "I grieved her," Madison continued. 3 years of therapy to accept the loss of a mother I barely knew. But she wasn't dead. She was here, playing happy family with your son and grandson while I worked night shifts to afford community college. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands trembled around the cup. "Do you know what it's like to learn that your mother not only abandoned you, but paid someone to convince you she was gone?" The room tilted. Esme hadn't just left her child. She'd erased herself. "How did you discover the truth?" I asked. "Your investigator was good, but not perfect." When he started asking questions in Portland, word reached a woman who used to clean my grandmother's house. She remembered me, and that my mother had paid her to spread the car accident story if anyone ever came looking. I sat down hard. "She paid someone to fake her own death. A few $100s to keep her past buried," Madison said with a hollow laugh. "Cheaper than child support." "Madison, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she'd go that far. It's not your fault." She studied my face. "But why were you investigating me?" "What does my mother's abandoned daughter have to do with your family?" So I told her everything. Raymond's discovery, the video, the confrontation at the restaurant, David's refusal to believe the truth, Esme's campaign to paint herself as the victim. When I finished, Madison sat in silence, absorbing every word. "She has a son," she said at last. "My half-brother, Elliot. He's 22, just graduated from Harvard Law, and he doesn't know about me." "He does now," I said softly. "He was there when the video played." Madison nodded slowly. "What did he say?" "He was shocked, confused. But Esme's been working hard to control the narrative ever since. She's convinced most of the family it was all more complicated." "Complicated how?" I hesitated, then told her the lie. "She's saying you were troubled, that you had substance abuse issues, that you were acting out. She claims she made a painful decision to let relatives raise you." Madison's cup hit the table, coffee sloshing over the rim. "Substance abuse?" "Acting out." Her voice rose. "I was 15. My grandmother was 78 and barely able to care for herself. I was getting A's in school and working part-time to help buy groceries." "I know," I said quietly. "I've seen your school records." "Then you know she's lying." "I do. But my family seems more inclined to believe her version." Madison walked to the window, staring out at the garden where I'd stood the day Sarah called to repeat Esme's spin on the story. "I want to meet them," she said finally. "Who?" "My half-brother, your son. I want them to hear the truth from me directly." My stomach tightened. "Madison, that might not be a good idea. Esme's had weeks to prepare. She'll have an explanation ready. Then we'll see how convincing she is when I'm standing there to contradict her." There was something in Madison's voice. Quiet determination, the same steel I'd once felt in myself at her age. "What do you hope to accomplish?" I asked gently. She turned, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I want my brother to know I exist. I want him to understand that our mother is capable of erasing her own children when they become inconvenient. And I want to make sure it never happens to him." The weight of her words settled over the kitchen like dust after a storm. Madison wasn't here for revenge or money. She was here to protect a sibling she'd never met from a mother who had already proven the unthinkable was possible. "There's a family barbecue this Saturday," I said slowly, "at David and Esme's house, a so-called healing gathering after the restaurant incident." Madison's jaw tightened. "Perfect, because," she said, "that's where I'll tell them." "Will you take me?" Madison asked. I thought of David's anger, of Esme's carefully built victim story, of the relatives who now question my judgment. Yes, I said at last, because sometimes the only way to fight a lie is to drag the truth into the same room and let it speak for itself. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that makes everything feel heavier than it is. Madison had driven down from Portland again, a small suitcase in the back seat in case this confrontation stretched into the weekend. We sat in my car outside David's house, watching silhouettes move behind the curtains as my family prepared for their so-called healing gathering. "Are you ready?" I asked. She smoothed her simple blue dress, neat and modest, the kind you wear when you want to look respectable but can't afford luxury. "No," she admitted, "but I don't think I'll ever be ready." "Let's just do it." I knocked instead of using my key, a quiet acknowledgement that my place in this house had changed. David opened the door, surprise flickering across his face before he schooled it into neutrality. "Mom, I wasn't sure you'd come." "I brought someone I'd like you to meet," I said, stepping aside. Madison stood in the doorway. Even someone determined to disbelieve the truth couldn't miss the family resemblance. David's warm brown eyes, Esme's delicate bone structure. "This is Madison Phillips." "Right," I said clearly. "Your stepdaughter." For a heartbeat, David simply stared, mouth slightly open. "Hello," Madison said, calm but firm. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." From the kitchen came a sharp crash of breaking glass, followed by Esme's too bright voice. "David? Who's at the door?" Madison glanced toward the sound. "Time for a real family reunion." The living room froze the moment we stepped inside. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as relatives who'd spent weeks debating my credibility faced the living proof of Esme's deception. Esme appeared in the doorway, a dish towel still clutched in her hand. Her face drained of color. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. "Madison?" Elliot rose slowly from the couch, his girlfriend beside him. He studied the young woman next to me with open wonder. You're my sister?" "Half-sister," Madison corrected gently. "But yes." The resemblance between them was unmistakable now. Same expressive eyebrows, same deep brown eyes. "I don't understand," David said, voice strained. "Madison, if you're really Esme's daughter, why didn't you contact us sooner?" Madison's laugh was soft, bitter. "Because until 2 weeks ago, I believed my mother was dead." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the coffee maker gurgling in the background. "That's not possible," Esme said finally, her voice thin. "Madison, sweetheart, you know that isn't true. You were angry when I remarried and chose to cut contact." "No," Madison replied, her tone firm and rising with every word. "I was 15 when you signed the papers terminating your parental rights. I was 17 when I aged out of foster care with no family. And I was 20 when I hired an investigator who handed me a death certificate claiming you died in a car accident." She pulled a folder from her backpack and placed it in David's hand. "These are the documents. The court papers you signed, the fake death certificate, even receipts for the payments you made to keep that story alive if anyone came looking." David's hands trembled as he turned the pages. His face shifted from disbelief to dawning horror. "You paid someone to fake your death?" he whispered. "David, you have to understand," Esme said quickly, stepping toward him, palms out as if to calm a wild animal. The situation was complicated. Madison was going through a difficult phase, and I thought, "I was getting straight A's." Madison cut in, her voice slicing through the room. "I worked part-time to help my elderly grandmother buy groceries. The only thing I was going through was trying to understand why my mother vanished." She turned to the gathered family, her voice steady, each word ringing with quiet authority. "I didn't come here for money. I didn't come for revenge. And I'm not here to break up anyone's family. I came here," Madison said, her voice steady but filled with quiet hurt, "because I discovered that my mother, who I mourned for 3 years, believing she was dead, has been living an entirely different life, while I struggled to survive on my own." Elliot stepped closer, his face suddenly older, weighed down by understanding. "What has your life been like since she left?" Madison met his eyes without wavering. "I've worked 2 jobs for the past 5 years to put myself through community college. I live in a tiny studio apartment that eats most of my income. No family support, no safety net. No one to call when things got hard." Her voice softened. "But I've also learned I'm stronger than I ever imagined." "Oh, sweetheart." My sister-in-law, Michelle's voice carried genuine sympathy from across the room. We had no idea, she said. Because you were never meant to know, Madison replied. My mother made sure of that. Esme edged backward toward the kitchen, her perfect composure unraveling. You don't understand, she repeated, almost chanting. None of you understand how complicated it was. Then explain it, David said, his voice hard. Explain how abandoning a 15-year-old and faking your own death was the right thing to do. She wasn't my responsibility anymore. The words fell like a stone in the silent room. I had a new life, a new family, Esme continued, her voice sharpening. I couldn't have my past following me around, complicating things. The bluntness of it made several relatives physically recoil. So you just erased her, Elliot said quietly. You erased your own daughter. I did what I had to do. Esme's voice climbed toward a shriek. You think it was easy? You think I wanted to give up my child? But I had to choose between my past and my future. And I chose my future. You chose yourself, Madison said, each word like a blade. You chose your comfort over your child's well-being. David set the folder of evidence on the coffee table and looked at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or even disappointment. It was recognition. Get out, he said quietly. David, please. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. Stay away from my family. Your family? Esme's voice turned sharp, almost mocking. Half of everything here is mine. Your assets, your retirement. You can't just throw me out. Actually, David said, his tone like iron, I can. The prenup you insisted on works both ways. Fraud and material misrepresentation void the agreement. Abandoning a child and faking your own death to hide it qualifies. My lawyer will contact you. Esme's face went pale. You wouldn't. I already have every reason to, David replied. Esme looked around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face. She found none. Even those who had doubted me were staring back with open disgust. You'll regret this, she hissed finally. All of you. You have no idea what you're throwing away. A liar? A child abandoner? Madison's voice cut through the tension. I think we'll manage. Esme slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The rest of the evening unfolded in a completely different atmosphere. Madison sat with us, sharing details of her life in Portland. Her night shifts as a security guard, her weekend barista job, her dream of becoming a social worker. She even pulled out photos of her small apartment, the first place that had ever truly belonged to her. What struck me most wasn't the stories or the pictures. It was how naturally she fit in. She laughed at the same dry jokes that always made David smirk. She offered practical suggestions when we talked about everyday problems. In her expressions and her steady gaze, I saw the unmistakable thread of family. For the first time in years, our house felt whole. Madison shared Elliot's love of books and that same quiet intensity when she talked about the things that mattered to her. Watching my grandson and his half-sister discover their connection was like seeing two pieces of a puzzle click into place. I can't believe I have a sister, Elliot said one evening, shaking his head in wonder. Half-sister, Madison corrected gently, though a smile played at her lips. Sister, he insisted. The half part is just biology. Sisters are about choice. 6 months later, I was in my kitchen preparing Sunday dinner for a larger crowd than I'd cooked for in years. Madison had transferred to a college near us, with David quietly helping with her tuition. Elliot had convinced her to move into the guest room of his apartment, claiming he needed a study partner for the bar exam. The divorce had moved quickly once David's lawyer presented evidence of Esme's deception. She vanished from our lives as thoroughly as she'd once vanished from Madison's, leaving behind nothing but the memory of the harm she'd tried to inflict. But the most remarkable change wasn't her absence. It was how the crisis had stripped away all the polite pretenses in our family. We were closer now, more honest, more willing to have hard conversations. Grandma Thelma. Madison appeared in the doorway, holding a bottle of wine. David sent me to see if you need help. I smiled at the name she'd chosen for me. Not Mrs. Caldwell, not Thelma, but Grandma, a title that welcomed her into our family while honoring the bond she'd built with my son and grandson. I think we're almost ready, I said, jumping the roast. How's school? Better than I expected. She leaned against the counter, more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. It's strange having people who care whether I succeed or fail. I'm still getting used to it. Good strange or bad strange? I asked. Definitely good. She paused, then added softly, Thank you. For everything. For investigating, for confronting him, for bringing me into this family. I know it wasn't easy. I studied her face and saw every version of her layered there. The frightened 15-year-old abandoned without warning, the determined 17-year-old who aged out of foster care, the hopeful 20-year-old who mourned a mother who wasn't really gone. You did the hard part, I told her. You survived. You built a life for yourself with no help from anyone. All I did was make sure the truth came to light. All you did, Madison echoed with a quiet smile, was save me from spending the rest of my life believing I wasn't worth loving. From the dining room came the sound of David and Elliot in a spirited debate. Madison's laugh soon joined theirs, filling the house with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Esme had tried to erase Madison to protect her perfect facade, but in the end her cruelty only drew us closer. Madison wasn't a secret to be hidden. She was the missing piece we never knew we needed. That Sunday, as we sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at my son, my grandson, and the granddaughter I'd gained through truth and perseverance. This wasn't the family Esme had tried to create through lies and manipulation. This was better. This was real. Now I'm curious about you, the listener. What would you have done in my place? Have you faced anything like this in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. And before you go, stay tuned for 2 more powerful stories on this channel. True favorites that will surprise you. Thank you for watching to the end.